My little brother is really into astronomy. He's 7 years old, and likes to look at the stars and watch all kinds of things. About 3 weeks ago, he spent literally the entire night looking at one part of space from his room. He never once moved, didn't even eat. When he got up at about noon the next day, I asked him what he was looking at. I was looking at the screaming stars. What are you talking about, you little brat? There's a place I found where, if you look at it, you can hear screaming. No way. I'll prove it to you. We waited until about 11 o'clock that night. The telescope hadn't moved since the night before. I looked into it, and sure enough, I could hear very faint screams. They eventually got louder, and I had to look away. I noped out and told our mom that she should take away his telescope. I'm never going to look at the stars again. When I was 14, my family moved to a new house. It was relatively small for a 5-person family, and since I was the oldest, I got the attic. I unpacked everything and set up my PlayStation. I was about to play some Mortal Kombat when I heard someone whispering my name. I decided to go check it out. It sounded like it was coming from the far corner of the attic. I got over there and saw the entrance to a crawl space that I somehow hadn't noticed before. I opened up the crawl space and found a mummified cat and claw marks on the back of the door. I ran downstairs and slept in the living room for the first few months. This happened the night Transformers 3 came out in Australia. My family are die-hard fans and went to go see it. I decided to stay home because I was feeling a little sick. So I was sitting in my room with a big glass door in front of me that looks out onto the front lawn area. The dog started barking, then suddenly stopped. 5 minutes later, they were at it again. This time, my cat ran to the door, ears up and staring outside, and didn't respond when I called him like he usually does. I had been looking outside the whole time. No one was coming to the door, and I hadn't heard any cars or anything. I noticed it was like 11 o'clock, and my family weren't home yet. The dog started barking for the third time, louder than before. Then, I heard the doorknob to my laundry room start moving. I could tell because it's loose, so it kind of clicks when it's being opened. Suddenly, everything went quiet, and stayed that way for about 5 minutes. Then, I heard the laundry door slam. The dogs weren't barking anymore, but the cat was still at the door. I heard the hallway cupboard door hinges start creaking and moving, and I realized that all these noises were getting closer and closer to my bedroom door. My friend has a big red barn in a field behind his house. The first floor was furnished for us to hang out in. The second floor was a storage area, so full of random crap you couldn't even see the floor. We'd always sleep there in the summer. One night, at about 1 in the morning, we were starting to fall asleep on the ground floor, when suddenly, we heard the sliding door on the second floor open. We could hear voices, and a lot of movement. Suddenly, there were a lot of voices. People were talking, and it sounded like a full-on party up there. We heard this freaking big jazz band start playing, and people dancing. The music got really weird and surreal. It sounded like it was underwater or something. The song started to completely fall apart, shrieking saxophones and all that stuff. The dancing people started screaming, and then there was dead silence. We went up there in the morning. All the stuff that was stored up there had been moved against the walls. My godfather's 98-year-old mother died about 4 years ago. I didn't know her that well. At her wake, I talked to my godfather about her. His brother loves to talk about how she was the only one who could beat my godfather at Scrabble. My brother reminisced about how we used to get a grape soda for visiting her, and I recollected how she used to give me a $2 bill when I was good. My dad remembered that when she reached her 80s, she used to complain that crows would ring her doorbell. It was a sad event, but I got over it. Later that night, I went over to my friend's house. He asked what we wanted to do that night, and another friend came over with a board game, Scrabble. We started playing, and my friend played the word crow. Later in the game, I played door, and another friend played the word bell. I started to get a little freaked out at that point. We ordered a pizza, and my friend picked it up at the door. He walked in with a 2-liter bottle of grape soda, because they were all out of orange. He gave us all our change, and he said the pizza guy gave him something weird. A $2 bill. He gave it to me, saying, "You should have it." Last month, I had to watch an old lady while her niece went to the store. She told me about her husband dying. I didn't really know what to say, but I gave her my sympathy. The niece had been gone for almost 30 minutes when I heard a car parking up the driveway. I went to the living room and saw from the window that it was her niece. I went back to the old lady's room, and some dude ran into the closet. I had a small freak out and grabbed a broomstick. I angrily marched over to the closet and started poking at the clothing. I heard footsteps in the hallway and ran out into the hall, just in time to see some old guy with exposed lungs walk across the room I was facing. I panicked and ran down the stairs. The niece walked in just as I got down and asked me what just happened. I was starting to think I was maybe on scare tactics or something, and felt my stomach drop when I realized she didn't know what I was talking about. In elementary school, I was at a sleepover with my best friend at her house for the first time. We explored the house, and she said I wasn't allowed in the room before the bathroom, since her grandfather lives there and doesn't want to be woken up at night. After the lights were off, I wasn't allowed to leave the bedroom. I figured it'd be no problem, since I'd be sleeping anyway. Naturally, I woke up and really had to pee. I tried to wake up my friend to show me back to the bathroom. I couldn't get her to wake up, so I went on my own and accidentally opened the grandfather's room. The grandmother was still awake in her rocker. I apologized and closed the door. I went and relieved my bladder and went to go back to the room, but was stopped in the kitchen by the grandmother. "You really shouldn't be out here." I went back to the room with a really weird feeling. When we woke up, I told my friend what had happened. She told me her grandmother had been dead for years. The porcelain dolls that lined her room were from her grandmother's collection. I looked at the walls and got another creepy feeling again. All the dolls seemed to be looking at me. I never slept over there again. I went to sleepaway camp every year from the ages of 10 to 15. The camp has its own classic ghost story, the story of Crazy Annie. The counselors told us she lived in an abandoned cabin way back in the forest, which we called the Rusty Knife. I blew it off as just a story to scare kids away from the cabin because it was falling apart. On the last day of the last year I could go to this camp, I saw that I had about 10 pictures left on my disposable camera, and decided, why not? I walked out to Rusty Knife, as all the counselors were busy organizing the kids as it was move-out day. I didn't see anything weird. It just looked like an ordinary old cabin. I used the remaining film to take 10 pictures of the cabin, all from different angles. A few weeks later, my mom got the film developed. I was looking through the pictures, and all of them were crystal clear, until I got to the Rusty Knife pictures. All of them had a strange orange blur. Every single picture of that cabin had the same strange blurry swirl running through the cabin. It was really weird, and I still don't know what to make of it. When I was 8, I was eating dinner with my family, not really paying much attention, when I started looking at the open door to my kitchen for no reason. Suddenly, a dog passed by the open door and continued down the hall. We didn't have a dog. No one else seemed to have seen it. I excused myself to the bathroom to look at what was there, and I couldn't find any trace of a dog. The hallway extends into my mudroom, so there was no way the dog could have come back without me seeing. I was creeped out, but eventually forgot about the incident. Years later, when I was 12, we were buying a dog for the family. We found this cute dog that we decided to buy, and nothing happened for about a year. When I was 13, I was again sitting and eating dinner with my parents, when suddenly, I saw the dog pass by the kitchen door. I went to go look and found our dog in the mudroom, and it was only then that it clicked for me. I realized that my dog was the same exact dog I had seen pass my kitchen door when I was 8. I was never able to look at my dog the same way again. When I was 16, I was staying in my mom's old house for the week. The house generally had a creepy vibe, but I didn't care at the time. The first couple of days went normally. Typical things that come with an old house, unexplained creaks and all that stuff. But on day 4, it got bad. I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. I got that spine-tingly, electricity in the air feeling. I decided to get up and go get some water. I was in the kitchen pouring my water when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I could hear them walking up to the kitchen. I closed the fridge and turned around and saw a shadow dart up the stairs. My room was upstairs, so I said screw that and decided to chill in the living room. Soon after, I heard the footsteps come back down the stairs. They stopped behind the sofa, and I started to hear breathing. I was frozen with fear, and I heard a voice say, "You have my name," in the most hateful voice ever. I exploded off the sofa and ran upstairs, and stayed there awake until morning. The next day, I asked my mom if I was named after anyone. It turns out, I'm named after my uncle, who hung himself in the living room, directly above the sofa. When I was 10, my parents were going through a violent divorce. I was made to stay at my crazy nan's house, which even for the 80s was a very outdated old home. She would never speak to me, but would always go to sleep way before it was dark by taking a lot of sleeping pills, leaving me to do whatever I wanted at night. From the first night, and every night on, from her room, I would hear footsteps and the cupboard door banging very loudly. Each night, I was too scared to check, until one night, I finally plucked up the courage. I was walking down the corridor, and as I approached the door, I heard the cupboard door open and footsteps walking towards the door. It opened just slightly, and through the crack, I saw an old lady's face, the same as my grandma's, but bolder and more rigid. She slowly pushed her head through the door, staring at me, mouth opened, but making no sound. I screamed and ran as fast as I could. I got to my next door neighbor and got them to phone the police, and they found nothing. In the end, I got taken to my auntie's instead. About 8 years later, at my mom's funeral, my drunken grandma told me about that night. She said that since she'd had her stroke, every night, her twin that died at birth visited her, walking around her room and hiding under the bed and in the closet like a child. That was why she took her sleeping tablets every night, so she wouldn't have to see it. This happened when I was around 10. It was my first time going to a scout camp. There was an oldish amusement park and bunker nearby to it. The scout leader took myself and the other scouts exploring. Inside the bunker was what seemed like a labyrinth of caves with tons of cave crickets and ankle-deep water. I somehow got separated from the scouts, and I shouted constantly for them. But after 15 minutes, I gave up on yelling out names. The crickets were constantly making their noises, but at one point, they stopped, and the only noise left was me sloshing through the water, trying to find the other kids. Eventually, I heard a loud splash and a high-pitched scream. I noped out and kept running until I finally worked up the nerve to look behind me. Crickets were falling off the walls and ceiling behind me, as if they were suddenly dying. I started to hear this odd breathing that sounded like someone was gurgling on something. By some miracle, I got back to the others, and never told anyone until years later. I still don't know what happened there. This was an abandoned concrete bunker that was broken down. When you went inside the hatch at the top of the hill that concealed it, after a few feet it went straight into a bunch of caves. It was somewhere in either deep northwest Texas or Oklahoma. I didn't pay much attention to where we were for those 2 days. I've been absolutely terrified of caves ever since. Before I tell you my tale, here's some backstory. There's this urban legend in town of Crybaby Alley. The alley is located behind an abandoned apartment complex that closed in the 70s. The alley leads into a dead end, a squared-off area with overgrowth and graffiti on the walls of children crying. The graffiti looks pretty old. It's very weathered. It depicts what looks like people on the roof having fun, and a child crying in a pool of filth. According to myth, one of the top-level apartments was inhabited by a strange woman who never left. One night, tenants heard screaming coming from her room, and the police were called. They found the woman crying in the corner, holding her newborn baby. There was blood everywhere, placenta on the floor, woman bleeding, and she had to be taken by force to the hospital. She was pregnant, but had never told anyone. Nobody ever found out how she got pregnant. Apparently, she never told anyone because she thought the doctors would kill the baby. After it was born, she'd frequently have fits of rage and left it locked in the closet when it wouldn't stop crying. On Halloween night, there was a party on the roof above her place. There was so much noise, and the baby was crying, so she locked it in the closet. The party was still making noise, and the baby's crying got louder, and she had a full-on freak-out. She stormed upstairs with the crying baby and started screaming at people. She apparently looked like she had never showered, and the baby still wouldn't stop crying. The people laughed at her and told her to get off the roof and take the brat with her. Then, she threw the baby off the roof in front of everyone to get them to stop. The woman was institutionalized, And the myth went on to state that anyone who went into the alley on Halloween at 2 or 3 a.m. would hear the sound of the baby crying. When I heard about it for the first time, I shrugged it off as a myth. My mom works at an old folks' home, and I decided to ask some of the locals about it. They'd never answered directly, and some seemed uneasy. One lady got angry and didn't answer. She just threw a random fit that made no sense, and I was asked to leave. Months later, on Halloween night, my friends brought it up. I decided, why not? Let's go to the place. I had no idea where it was, but my girlfriend at the time did. We went there and saw the path to the alleyway leading into absolute darkness. I was starting to nope hard, but I wanted to impress my girlfriend. I cautiously said, "Let's check it out." Slowly, we all started heading into the darkness. I was stepping on fallen twigs from overgrowth. Somehow that was the scariest sound of my life. We kept moving forward at a snail's pace. My girlfriend grabbed my hand, and all my friends were following behind me closely. Apparently, they had decided I was pack leader. We finally got to the closed-off area at the end of the alleyway. I couldn't see a thing. I took out my cell phone light, and trees and bushes were casting ominous shadows. This place was enveloped in absolute darkness, the darkest dark. Suddenly, we started to hear strange mumbling sounds. It wasn't the leaves, not the wind. There was no wind. Only the weirdest sound ever. We all started stumbling back to find the exit when we heard bushes rustling hard, as if there was something in there that was sleeping and had just woken up. We heard crackling sounds from within. That broke us. We started running, and past this old garage door that we hadn't noticed before. Suddenly, something loudly started banging on it from the other side. We all screamed and ran for our lives as fast as we could. We didn't stop running until we were several blocks away. We never told anyone, never got an answer, and never went back to that place. When I was 14, my room was upstairs with my bedroom window facing the neighbor's porch. I had been told there was an old man living there alone, but in my 14 years, I had never once seen him. The house looked abandoned, and I kind of doubted that he was even real. In the late winter, around 2 a.m., I found I couldn't sleep. I looked through my window and saw my neighbor sitting in the chair on his porch, looking straight at me. For some reason, I was frozen in fear, afraid to move. I unfroze and noped away from the window, too afraid to even close the curtains. I laid in bed for about 10 minutes, then peeked through the window again, hoping he'd be gone. Nope. Still there, and still looking right at my window. I nearly fainted from the fear. I closed the curtains and put some comedy on TV, trying to forget about him. I only fell asleep at sunrise, when I felt safe. When I woke up, I didn't dare look out the window again. I went to school as usual, and came home later that day to an ambulance outside the neighbor's house. My parents told me that he had died sitting on the porch. That sent chills down my spine. Did he die while looking at my window? Was he dead the whole night? I was glad I didn't look through the window in the morning. At least this way, I can pretend he didn't die looking at my window. When I was 7, one of my older brother's friends stayed with us. He was like 18 or so, I guess. There weren't enough beds, so my mother and I stayed in one. At around 3 a.m., I heard this guy step over to the side of our bed. It was pitch black, and I couldn't see him. Hey, little girl, hey. Let me into bed with your mom. I said, What? Go away. It wasn't the voice of the guy, nor my dad or my big bro. Pretty please, let me sleep here. Go with your brother. You like to sleep in bed with him. No! Please. No, no, no! I was scared, and I realized that I couldn't actually see this weirdo. I pretended to fall asleep. Hello? Are you awake? Finally, the weirdo left, and I was able to sleep. 16 years later, I remembered this event and told my mom. She said she'd never given permission for my brother to invite friends to sleep over. Nobody remembers this guy, not even my big bro. I still remember the sound of that voice. Hey, little girl. I was hanging out with my best friend and my 2 kids, aged 7 and 5, at my house. My daughter decided she wanted to play her favorite game, hide and seek. Now, I take hide and seek way serious. I love hiding so well that the kids can't find me. And the house is kinda big, about 3,000 square feet or so it definitely lends itself to the game. There was a pile of clothes by my bed, and I hid halfway in the pile and halfway under the bed. I was proud of my spot, so I stayed there and waited. I don't remember who was originally it, but eventually I heard everyone but me get found. My kids and friend were out looking for me, and I heard the footsteps heading towards my room. It sounded like only one person was coming my way. I heard the footsteps come into my room. My spot was directly in front of the door, only 10 feet away. I held my breath and waited, and waited, and waited. Nothing happened. I was positive someone was standing just feet away from me. Suddenly, I heard my friend and kids in the guest room talking as they looked for me. Then, who was standing in front of me? I became even stiller than before, unable to move. I sat like that in silence and fear for what felt like 20 minutes before my kids and friend finally came to the room and found me. I still have no idea what I heard come into my room, It doesn't help that my wife has said she's heard a few creepy things in the house as well. My friend is married with 2 toddlers in an apartment. His brother was over that day, and it was nighttime and time to go to bed. My friend and his wife were in bed when the kids woke up. The wife went and put him back to sleep, and my friend was just watching TV in the bedroom. He saw his wife leave the kids' room and go into the bathroom, and she was in there for 10 minutes, but made no sound at all. No toilet flush, no water from the sink, nothing. She left and walked to the living room. Same thing. She was in there for 10 minutes and did nothing and made no noise whatsoever. He looked down the hallway from the bed into the living room and saw the wife just standing there, staring back. She was wearing different clothes, something that she would normally wear to bed, but not what she was wearing a minute ago. Her hair was partly blocking her face, and she started to motion her hand for him to come, not saying a word. My friend was just wondering what she was doing. She continued to motion her hand, then finally walked out of view further into the living room. Once again, he heard no noise at all, and decided to get up and see what she was doing. He went to the living room and saw nobody. The front door was locked. He checked outside anyway, but nobody was around. Wondering what was going on, he went to check on the kids and found his wife still trying to get them to sleep. She never left that room. My friend did some research, and he found something that made him nope. Apparently, sometimes demons impersonate people and try to make you come with them to wherever they go. My friend has a lot of screwed up demon stories, but this was his most recent. I'll always remember how he said he couldn't really make out her face. How it looked normal, but almost kind of blurry. This happened in late fall, in northern New England. It was cold, and an inch or two of snow on the ground made the roads a little icy. My brother-in-law came up for a weekend during deer season. We were planning to get out really early the next morning, so we hit up Walmart the night before to pick up a few things. I live in the middle of nowhere, so Walmart is about a 45-minute drive. It was about 9:30 when we left, so it was well past dark. We got what we needed and headed back. It was probably about 10:45 or so by then. We headed up a long, single-lane road that doesn't get much traffic. I saw an animal that got hit by a car off the side of the road, still partially in the lane. From a distance, it looked like a medium or large dog, so I slowed down. As we got closer, we realized it was a giant, and I mean freaking giant, rabbit. As we drove around it, it picked its head up in a seemingly unnatural way and watched us go by. A few seconds of silence went by, and my brother-in-law eventually said, "Dude, did we just see an undead rabbit?" I was really creeped out by the whole thing, and it was a mostly silent ride home. When I got home, my wife was already in bed. I got ready for bed too and laid down next to her, and she said, "I'm glad you're home. I was really worried." I asked why she was worried, and she said, "Because of the big rabbit." I got the worst chills of my life and shot straight up. I asked her how she knew about that, and she didn't answer. I shook her shoulder, and she moaned sleepily. Turns out, she was talking in her sleep. She still doesn't remember saying anything like that. When I was 12 years old, my grandmother was still alive, but my grandfather had died in the 80s. They had a lot of pig knickknacks and stuff lying around their house, since they had started a mom-and-pop barbecue restaurant in the 40s. The creepiest one is the pig oven mitt, a realistic hog mouth with sharp teeth and red tongue. I used to make my little sister cry by chasing her with it. One day, I chased her into my grandmother's basement. The basement was set up just like another floor of the house. My uncle used to crash there occasionally. All of a sudden, I felt really uncomfortable and threw away the pig mitt and started looking for my sister. I couldn't find her, so I came back into the room where I originally was, and the pig mitt was gone. I started feeling even worse, and told her to come out and stop trying to scare me. Eventually I found her, but I still didn't see the pig mitt. When I went to leave, it was at the bottom of the basement stairs, in the exact opposite of the direction I had thrown it. I felt something brush by my shoulder, and the mouth started moving, like someone was wriggling their hand into it. I grabbed my sister and ran up the stairs. I never went back down there, unless Grandma came with me. I found out later that my great-grandfather had lived out the rest of his days down there, and had died in the room I found my sister in. I got a job immediately after high school, and became pretty good friends with some of my coworkers. We decided we should get a house together nearby so we could drive to work together and stuff. We scoped out a few places, and found one that seemed to be perfect. 2 bedrooms on the main floor, an upper room which is practically just a big living room with a closet, and a basement, so 2 rooms and 2 makeshift ones. When we moved in, I began putting my stuff in the upper room, eventually getting to my clothes last. When I opened up the closet, I noticed on the left there was a small little door with a latch on it. I opened it and found that it led to the attic. I immediately got this overwhelming bad feeling about it. I really can't explain it, but I backed out and slammed the door shut. I thought to myself, I'm just messing with myself. Come on, nothing's there. I opened it back up, and I felt it again, like a huge wall of negative force practically yelling at me to get out. I heard something coming from within. I once again backed out and slammed the closet door shut. My coworker opened my door and asked why I was slamming doors. I told him there was something wrong with this closet, how it feels evil. He didn't believe me and laughed at me while walking up the stairs. I stood back while he opened the door and went in. He froze for like a good 5 seconds, but it seemed like forever before he too backed out and slammed it shut. He looked at me with just pure fear. We got the other 2 guys involved, and they both came up, checked out the closet, and they both felt it too. We were all pretty freaked out by this. We couldn't explain why it was doing this. One of them said I could just use his closet and to not screw with it. Later that night, it was the first time I was actually sleeping in that bedroom. I was laying in my bed trying to fall asleep when all of a sudden, I heard something messing with the handle to the closet. I immediately noped out of bed and began going down the stairs. As I did, it felt like something pushed me. I fell down, and my knee slammed into the mirror on the door, shattering it, and getting glass all up on my knee and leg. I had to go to the hospital, and when I came back the next day, we immediately barricaded off that door. I'm still living here, still in the upstairs. Occasionally, I'll hear scratching or pounding coming from the other side of the wall where that thing is. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to screw with it.